Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. Thanks so much for spending your Sunday afternoon here with me today. I am your host, Annie Lee, and this is the Unpopular Teacher. If this is your first time listening, welcome, genuinely. I'm glad you found your way here. Just as a quick recap, this podcast is a reflection of my personal journey, how I learned to love myself after many, many years of not. And when I say that, I don't mean, in the loud, dramatic version of self-hatred. I mean the quiet kind, the polished kind, the kind that looks completely put together on the outside while something on the inside is hollowing out. And, I really think that distinction is important. It matters because the quiet kind is sneaky. It masquerades itself as ambition, right? As responsibility, as discipline, as keeping it all together. And because it looks acceptable, admirable, even, we don't even question it. We don't really recognize it for what it is, which is exactly why we're here. For those of you who have been with me since episode 1, thank you genuinely so much. The likes and the reshares have really inspired me to continue. And if I'm going to be completely honest, I didn't think anyone would actually want to listen to this. I wasn't sure if I had the right to say any of this out loud. Which if you've been following me along since episode 1, that is exactly the kind of thought process, right, that we've been unpacking here together. That voice that says, who do you think you are? How dare you feel like you can take up space here? But here we are, episode 4. So I'm really glad we're doing this together. And before we get into today's topic, I did want to go through a quick recap for anyone new or for anyone who wants a quick refresher before diving into episode 4. So in episode 1, we talked about the concept of the great unlearning itself. And, this is really the central idea of the entire podcast, which is that most of what we think, want, fear, and believe about ourselves were handed to us by our parents, by the institutions we grew up inside of, by a culture, whether intentionally or not, profits from our insecurities. And the work of unlearning is not about adding more to yourself, more discipline, more optimization, more fixing. It's really about removing what was never yours to begin with. And then in episode 2, we went a little deeper into the quiet, socially acceptable ways that we reject ourselves every single day. Things like gossip, judgment, mistreating others, lack of integrity. And what all of those behaviors have in common at their root is really a fractured relationship with the self. A self that was never given permission to simply be enough as it was. And then in episode 3, which actually garnered the most responses of any episode so far, but that doesn't surprise me because we talked about the voice in your head, right? And the fact that you are not the voice in your head. That the inner critic, the relentless inner narrator, the voice that judges and second guesses and catastrophizes everything, that is not who you are. It is a tool, a recording, a collection of the data your brain has gathered over a lifetime of trying to keep you safe. But it is not you. And the moment you genuinely understand the difference between you and that voice, everything begins to change. That concept, right, the distinction between you and your inner voice is the foundation for everything that we're going to be talking about here today. So, in today's episode, we are going to talk about where the voice gets its material. We're really exploring our obsession with the external world, the news, politics, celebrity culture, internet outrage, the constant, relentless urgency of everything happening everywhere all at once. The way we have been conditioned, deeply, systematically conditioned, right, to look outward at other people, at crises, scandals, at everyone else's lives instead of looking inward at our own. And the question I want us to hold today is this: why are we so obsessed with the world instead of ourselves? And I think that when we are in the thick of something, we rarely recognize how deep we actually are in it. When I think back on the earlier years of my life, when I was really, really, really young, and I try to pinpoint the exact moment when my self-loathing began, I can't find it. There was no single moment, no one critical event I can hold up and say that's when it all started. Because for me, it was a slow accumulation, a gradual erosion, like water wearing down a stone. You don't see it happening in real time, but one day you look up and you're just like, whoa, stone is completely different than what it was before. And now I've always been a deeply sensitive person. And I want to be specific about that because I know the word sensitive gets used as an insult. You know, people say it dismissively, like, oh, don't worry about it. She's just super sensitive. As if sensitivity is a deficiency, as if feeling things deeply is a design flaw that needs correcting. Yes, I do feel things profoundly. I always have. And for a long time, I was so ashamed of that. But now I understand it as one of the most sacred things about me. You know, I used to be the type of person who would cry during a Christmas Coca-Cola commercial. Everybody knows the one, right? You got the snow falling. There's like some drama with family, like families are hugging. There's like warm, swelling music in the background, right? The one that tugs at your heart. And I would have streams running down my face. And my family always made fun of me. They thought it was hilarious, you know? But that warmth, right? That belonging, that sense of everything being exactly as it should be, that's what the commercial represented. And something inside me would ache toward it. I remember back in the 90s and early 2000s, my family used to sit around, you know, after dinner and watch K-dramas. And I don't know why this was like such a popular theme, but the protagonist would always be dying of some like fatal disease, right? Whether it's like leukemia or some sort of cancer. And I would just be like bawling my eyes out during these episodes, right? Just experiencing it as if somebody close to me was dying of this illness themselves. That was the type of person I was, you know? Or even something like going out in nature and seeing a sunset over the ocean, right? Mountains rising in the distance. A forest so quiet you could hear the wind rustle. When I experience nature like that, I have goosebumps all over my body, chills down my spine, tears starting to form, but I refuse to let it fall. And it would always make me wonder how some people believe that heaven was not here on earth, because sometimes it really felt like it was. And that's how alive I was to the world around me. Until the world started teaching me something else. The world taught me to be hard, taught me to toughen up, to stop crying, stop feeling so much, reacting so deeply to everything, because I was constantly receiving the same message in different packaging from the people around me. You're too sensitive. You're reading too much into it. You're imagining things. Stop being so dramatic. You're paranoid. You're the crazy one. You are just too much. And here's what happens when you hear something enough times, especially as a child, especially from people whose love and approval feel essential to your survival. You don't argue with it. You absorb it. You let it move in. It settles into the walls of your inner life, and eventually, it starts to sound like your own voice. That's how self-rejection begins. Not with a dramatic wound you point to. It begins the first time someone you love implies that the truest, most natural part of you are a problem. And somewhere very deep beneath conscious thought, you decide they might be right. So you start editing yourself quietly, incrementally, until the edited version becomes so familiar that you forget there was ever an original. You know, I've mentioned before that I'm Korean American, and my mother's family is from the north and my father's from the south. And when I used to listen to my grandparents' stories during the war and the things that they witnessed, the things that they were forced to do just to survive, I was horrified. Not just by the violence of it all, but by the dehumanization. The way entire human beings were reduced to obstacles or assets or threats. The way love was severed by borders. The way identity could be stripped from a person by force. And what strikes me even now is how that history illustrates something I believe at my core. When we act in ways that genuinely harm others, when we participate in cruelty and violence and domination, we are also harming ourselves. We are moving backwards in our journey. We are regressing. The soul's purpose, call it what resonates with you, right? Soul, consciousness, your awareness, whatever. Its objective is to grow, to elevate, to learn the lessons it came here to learn. And violence and cruelty are not evolution. They are the opposite. And the news of the world is not new. The exploitation, the corruption, the abuse of power, this has always existed. What is shifting is a visibility. And I believe visibility is a symptom of something real. Something is breaking down, something old, something that no longer has a structural integrity to hold itself together. And in that place, something new is emerging. The question is whether we are paying enough attention to our own inner worlds to be part of what comes next. Now, me being a very mathy person, right? I did want to take a second here and get a little bit scientific, because I think it's genuinely important to understand what's happening inside your brain when you feel overwhelmed, reactive, or disconnected from yourself, because it's not weakness. It's not a character flaw, right? It's biology. And once you understand the biology, you stop judging yourself for the reaction, and you start understanding the information the reaction is trying to give you. So when we think about the brain, we don't really think about it as having three distinct regions, but each one plays a very different role in how you move through the world. The first is the neocortex. And this is the part of the brain we most associate with thinking, right? Higher order reasoning, logic, problem solving, critical thinking, decision making. When you sit down and think something through carefully, that's your neocortex doing its job. Second is the reptilian brain. Now, this is the oldest part of the brain, evolutionarily speaking, and it governs the most fundamental survival functions, right? Fight or flight, freeze. When your body responds before your conscious mind has time to catch up. Think about it like when a car just comes swerving out of nowhere towards you and you're already braking and turning before you even thought about it, right? That's your reptilian brain. It's ancient, it's fast, and it does not distinguish between a physical threat and an emotional one. It responds to both the same way. Now, the third one, the one I want to spend the most time on here today, is the limbic system. Now, the limbic brain is where emotion and memory live. It is a part of you that processes not just what happened, but how you felt about it. And it is, in my understanding, the primary channel through which our deeper self, our soul, our consciousness, whatever word fits for you, right? It's how it communicates with us. Think about that for a moment. Your emotions are not just feelings. They are information. Your limbic system is constantly processing your external environment and sending you signals. This feels safe. This doesn't. This feels aligned with who I am. This doesn't. This feels true. This feels like a script someone else handed to me and I'm performing it. And so when you feel a sudden burst of anger or inexplicable sadness or that tight, anxious feeling in your chest that you can never quite name, it's not weakness. That is communication. Your soul is trying to reach you through the only channel it has, and it is telling you something is out of alignment. Something is not yours. Something here needs your attention. And here's why this matters directly for what we're talking about today. When we are constantly saturated by the external world, by news cycles, social media algorithms, political outrage, celebrity drama, our limbic system is working overtime. It is processing an enormous, unrelenting stream of emotional data. Fear, outrage, urgency, threat, grief, injustice. And it is doing exactly what it was built to do, responding. But most of what we're responding to has nothing to do with our actual lives. We are generating enormous emotional energy, life force, about situations that are entirely outside our control. And all of that energy gets spent, depleted, on things that do not move our own lives forward, on things that do not belong to us. Meanwhile, the signals our limbic system is trying to send us about our own lives our own needs, our own misalignments, our own longings, those get buried, ignored, drowned out by the noise. Because there's no bandwidth left. And I want to say again, that is not accidental. Now, a note on taking care of your limbic system, because this is not just emotional work, it is also physical work. Your emotional brain thrives when you eat well and consistently, when you move your body, when you sleep through the night with enough hours, when your relationships are nourishing rather than depleting, when you manage stress actively rather than just tolerating it, when you challenge yourself in ways that feel meaningful, when you are gentle with yourself instead of being constantly critical. These are not optional extras. They are the foundation. You cannot do the deep work of unlearning, of really coming home to yourself, if your nervous system is running amok. It's running on empty and your body is being treated like a machine that needs to produce output rather than a living thing that needs to be cared for. Now, let's talk about the world we actually live in, because understanding why we're so distracted and externally focused requires understanding the system that profits from that distraction. Right? Now, I'm almost 40 years old, and I say that not to make myself feel old, but because I have actually lived through one of the most significant shifts in human experience since the printing press. I lived in a world before the internet was something you carried in your back pocket. All right? I remember a time when if you needed directions from point A to point B, you put it into MapQuest, you printed them out on actual paper, and then you were reading the directions while you were driving. And if it was during the summertime and your windows were down, believe me not, those sheets were going out that window, right? And that happened to me a lot. So I would be pulling over, calling 411, asking a stranger for help, right? A real human being in person. I remember having to go to the public library to use the internet because the internet was considered a luxury. Not every household had access, right? You either got a second line, which was crazy expensive, or you got the dial-up version, that sound, right? That terrible but wonderful, patient sound of connecting. And you would sit there and wait, sometimes minutes, just for one single page to load. And you would think it was incredible because at the time it was. Now think about how different our world is today. We have access to the entire scope of human experience in our back pocket. Every headline, every tragedy, every political scandal, every war, every opinion, every piece of outrage, every celebrity meltdown, every injustice, every debate, all of it, all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There's no pause, no intermission, no rest. We're drowning in information, and we've been told that this is progress, it's connection, that this is being informed and engaged and responsible even. And there is some truth in that, but there's also a very uncomfortable question underneath it all. What is this constant exposure actually doing to your internal world? And here's something most people don't fully reckon with. Modern media, and I mean all of it, right? News channels, social media platforms, political campaigns, advertising companies, entertainment companies, influencer culture, all of it is built on a single foundational resource: your attention. Your attention is one of the most valuable commodities in the world right now. Because your attention is energy, and energy attracts. Where your attention flows, that thing grows. Whether it is your own healing or someone else's bottom line. So news organizations are not simply reporting information. They're competing for your attention. Social media platforms are not simply connecting people. They are engineering digital environments specifically designed to keep you engaged as long as possible, using literally every behavioral psychology tool in the book to make sure that you keep scrolling. Political campaigns are not just sharing platforms and ideas. They are manufacturing emotional responses that keep you loyal, reactive, and dependent on their framing of reality. And the single most effective tool for capturing and holding human attention, it's not joy. It's not beauty. It's not hope. It's outrage, fear, shock, urgency, threat. Have you noticed, like every headline, that's why it feels like it's the end of the world. That is why everything is breaking news, right? Why the stories that perform the best on every platform are the ones that make you feel the most afraid, the most angry, the most outraged, the most threatened. Because fear keeps you watching and outrage keeps you clicking. Urgency keeps you scrolling, and as long as you're scrolling, you're consuming. And as long as you're consuming, the system is working exactly as it was designed to. And here's the deeper consequence of all of this that I don't think we talk about enough. When your attention is constantly fixated on the external world, right, on global politics, what did this politician do today? What did this celebrity say today? What outrage is trending? You are spending your life force on things you cannot control. And I want to be precise here because I'm not saying don't care about the world. I'm not saying be willfully ignorant, uninformed, and withdraw from reality. That's not what this is. What I'm saying is this. The things that receive the most of our collective attention and energy are largely things that exist entirely outside our actual sphere of influence. We cannot change them by consuming more content about them. We cannot heal them by being more outraged. And we cannot solve them by spending 3 hours a night watching people argue about them on television or debating about them in the comment sections. But what we can change is ourselves. We can heal our own lives. We can examine our own patterns. We can build the internal world that actually creates real, lasting external change, not the performative kind. Not the trending kind, but the real change that starts from the inside and radiates outward. And that work, the only work that is truly within our power to do, often gets neglected. Because we're too exhausted, too overstimulated, too depleted from monitoring everyone and everything outside ourselves to have anything left for the one place that actually matters. Remember, I said this, I think, in episode 2. Divided people don't unite. Distracted people don't question. And people who are perpetually looking outward never look inward. That is not a coincidence. That is a feature, not a bug of the system we are living inside. Excuse me. I want to talk about something that sits at the intersection of the personal and the larger collective. Because I think that what's happening in the world right now mirrors something that happens inside every single person who begins this process of unlearning. And I find the parallels both fascinating but also comforting. I think we are living through like a genuine timeline split, not just politically, not just culturally, but in terms of consciousness, in terms of what we choose to prioritize and value and believe about ourselves and our lives. And there is the one path that keeps you tethered to the external world, to comparison and performance and validation and consumption, right? It is a path that measures your worth by what you own, what you've achieved, what titles you hold, how many followers you have, how much money you have, right? How well perceived you are by the people who you probably aren't thinking about you as much as you're thinking about them. Let's be honest here, right? To worshiping things outside of yourself, whether it's politicians, celebrities, brands, movements, right? Institutions, and giving them the authority to define who you are and whether you matter. And then there's the other path, a quieter path, one that turns inward, that asks you questions nobody in the external world is incentivized to ask on your behalf. What do I actually want? Not what was I told to want, not what would make the right people approve of me, not what would look impressive, but what do I genuinely, in the deepest, quietest core of me, really want? From the honesty of my own heart, what would I choose if no one was watching? What would bring me real fulfillment? Not the performative kind, but true fulfillment. Now, those are two very different ways of moving through a life. And you cannot fully walk both at the same time. One path feeds on your attention and gives you a sense of purpose through reaction. The other path asks you to sit with yourself long enough to remember who you actually are. And that is slower, it is harder, and it is the most important thing you will ever do. Now, I want to share a principle that has become somewhat of an anchor for me, and that is this, that everything in life comes in pairs, right? Good and love, good and evil, love and hate, abundance and lack, action and stagnancy, expansion and contraction, light and shadow, right? Clarity and confusion. The universe, as best as I can tell, does not simply reward the good and punish the bad, right? It's not in some clean, obvious transactional way. No, it responds to frequency. The energy that you are consistently generating from your inner world. And if your inner world is rooted genuinely, not performatively, right? Rooted in a sense of enoughness, of clarity, of abundance, of belief in your own worth, your outer world will begin to reflect that. Not instantly, not linearly, but over time, consistently. And if your inner world is rooted in scarcity and doubt and the constant belief that you are behind or unworthy or that good things are meant for other people, that too will reflect outward. This is why what we consume matters so deeply, because consumption is not passive. Every headline you read, every piece of information you absorb, every conversation you have, right? Every scroll, it is all contributing to the internal environment you are living inside of. It shapes the lens through which you interpret your own life and your own worth. And self-love and self-hatred are themselves two sides of the same coin. You cannot exhaust your life force monitoring the external world and expect to have energy left for self-love. You cannot consume a steady diet of fear and outrage and expect your inner world to be peaceful. You cannot pour everything you have into everyone and everything outside yourself all the time and then wonder why you feel so empty and depleted on the inside. It all comes back to one thing, attention and where you choose to place it. So here is what I want to leave with you this week. Just a question and a practice. The question is this. If the external world went completely quiet, no news, no social media, no political drama, no celebrity gossip, no one watching you, no one judging you, no one telling you what matters or what to want or who to be, just you, your actual life, and your inner world, what would you want? What would bring you genuine joy? What would make you feel truly fulfilled? Not just busy, not just productive, but fulfilled. What would you spend your time and energy on if no one was watching? What would you let yourself want? And sit with those questions, not to find the answers immediately. They won't come that fast, and that's okay. The point is to notice what comes up. And also to notice the resistance. Notice the voice that says those things aren't practical, aren't realistic, right? Aren't allowed. And then try to remember that voice is not you. It is a collection of every opinion and expectation and fear that was handed to you before you were old enough to question whether you actually agreed. You don't have to fight it. You don't even have to silence it. You just have to stop letting it be the final word. And the practice this week is super simple. It's just one thing. Choose one window of time, 30 minutes, an hour, 15, 10, 5 minutes, if that's all that's manageable. And deliberately do not consume anything external. No news, no social media, no podcasts, including this one, right? No videos, no scrolling, just you. Your thoughts, your body, your life without all the commentary from the outside world. I mean, you don't have to meditate, you don't have to journal, but, if the impulse comes to you, by all means, follow through with it. You can take a walk, sit with a cup of coffee, cook something, sit in silence, whatever feels natural to you. The only rule is no external input. And just notice what thoughts surface when the noise fades. Notice what your inner world actually sounds like when it's not competing with everything else. Notice what you feel when there's nothing to react to. Because your attention is your life force. And wherever you place it, that is what grows. So the question I'll leave you with this week is not what is happening in the world. The question is, what is happening in you? Because the only world you have genuine power to change is the one inside you. And that world has been waiting for your attention for a very long time. Thank you so much for spending this Sunday with me. This has been the Unpopular Teacher. I'm Annie Lee, and I will see you all next week.